Hey folks, this is Vince with Dad's Gaming Addiction, and today we're going to take a very quick look at the game Star Trek Catan. Now this game plays a lot like the Settlers of Catan, but the only difference is you're going to be placing starships instead of roads, star bases and outposts instead of cities and settlements respectively, and so on and so forth. Let's just take a quick moment to look at the components and see how the game is played. Now, just to give you a brief overview of the components, you've got these border pieces here, which basically serve as the outside of the playing board. These will surround these hex tiles over here. You've got these number tokens, which will fit on top of these hex tiles, and these will play a part during resource collection. You've got 4 sets of playing pieces. You've got starships, which will take place of your roads, and as you may have seen in the regular Settlers of Catan. You've also got star bases and outposts, the outpost piece being the bottom one, and the star base expansion being the top one, and they fit right over top each other. And to help them stand up on the hexes, you've got a bunch of these little white stands. You also have this Klingon battle cruiser, which will take the place of the Thief. If you have ever played the Settlers of Catan, you'll know how nasty the Thief is, but in this case, you've got a Klingon battle cruiser for that. You've got 5 decks of resource cards: water, oxygen, titanium, food, and dilithium. Players will be trying to collect these throughout the game to buy these starships and outposts and star bases. You've also got some development cards, which players will also be able to spend resources on. These provide bonuses and victory points and different things like that. You also have these support cards, and this is something that's new. In the regular Settlers of Catan, you didn't have this, but in Star Trek Catan you do. Basically, each player will be allowed to control one of these characters, and each character provides a special bonus. James T. Kirk, Christine Chapel, Sulu, Spock, they all do something different and provide the player with a unique advantage, and players will be able to switch these out throughout the entire game. You've also got reference cards, just basically help players keep track of what things cost what. And finally, you have these 2 special cards here, and Settlers of Catan vets will recognize these. You've got the longest supply route. The person basically with the most starships in a line or roads in a line will receive that and some victory points, and this will change hands throughout the game. And you've also got the largest Starfleet card, and again, that's the same as this, except that you'll be able to earn this if you have 3 or more of these Starfleet Intervene cards, which is in the development deck. So there's a lot of similarities between this game and the regular Settlers of Catan, with the exception of the support characters. But let's take a moment to set the game up and see how it's played. Alright, for the benefit of those who have never played the Settlers of Catan at all, your primary objective in Star Trek Catan, or even in the Settlers of Catan, is to gain 10 victory points. And you can do that in a few different ways. You can build outposts, which are these, and that'll reward you with 1 victory point. You can upgrade your outposts to star bases. That is worth 2 victory points. You can acquire these cards from the development deck. Again, that's these. And each card in that deck is 1 victory point, although when you draw those cards, there's no guarantee that you actually get these. There are other cards in that deck. And finally, there are 2 of these special cards. You've got the longest supply route. This card goes to the player with the longest unbroken supply of at least 5 starships. Another player who builds a longer supply route takes this card. And you've also got the largest Starfleet, which basically the first player to play 3 Starfleet Intervene cards gets this card. Another player who plays more Starfleet Intervene cards gets to take this card instead. So both of these cards will be changing hands. So a player's victory points will be fluctuating back and forth, up and down throughout the entire game. But the first person to get 10 victory points will end up winning it. Setting up the game is pretty simple. You'll simply place these border tiles along the outside and fit these hex pieces in the middle. Now, the order in which you place them can either be predetermined or customized. The manual does have a layout for first-time players, and this is the setup that actually the manual recommends just for balance purposes. Though you can go ahead and shuffle the tiles around randomly, do whatever you want. If you have a particular setup that you like, if you're a veteran of the game, you can set up the board the way you like it. You can also place these number tokens anywhere you want, though again the manual does tell you where you can place them or where you should place them if you're a first-time player. Once the board is set up the way you like it, you can go ahead and put the 5 resource card types along the side of the board in their respective decks. Each player will receive one of these support characters. Who receives what all depends on how many people are playing and who the oldest is, and so on and so forth. You'll also shuffle the development card deck. Each player will also receive one of these building costs reference cards. The Klingon battlecruiser, just like the Thief, will be placed in the middle of the board. Each player will also receive a set of their own colored pieces. And finally, each player will roll a die to determine who goes first. Now, the player that does go first gets to put an outpost and a starship down on the board somewhere. And placement, there's a few rules to consider, but for the most part, outposts cannot be adjacent to one another. That's the basic rule behind this. All outposts and starships are placed on bordering edges of these hexes, not directly on it, but on the lines here that separate them. So, for example, let's say that the blue player decides to put one outpost here at this intersection, and then he can then put a starship down here. Now, the player that is clockwise will go ahead and place an outpost and a starship of their own. Alright, and once all of the players have done that, the person that went last in that previous round, that setup round, will get to go first this time. They'll go ahead and place another outpost and another starship. Only this time, they'll actually receive a resource, one resource of each type that borders that outpost. So in this case, the white player who went last gets to go first, place the outpost here, and would get a resource for this white planet, that red planet, this white planet, the red planet, and the yellow planet, because the outpost borders them. So he would then get to pick up one card of each type, one oxygen, one tritanium, and one food. Finally, players in a counterclockwise fashion will go back around the table so that the first person that went first in the first round will get to go last, and in this case it's the blue player. So we'll go ahead and just do that and that. And again, he would be able to pick up resources that border that particular outpost. In this case, the blue planet, the yellow planet, and the green planet, which happens to be water, oxygen, and dilithium. Now, a player's turn is actually pretty simple. First, they'll go ahead and roll both dice, and whatever number comes up is the planet that will actually produce a resource for that turn. So let's say that it's White's turn and he rolls an 8. And there's an 8 right there and an 8 up there. Now, in that case, blue has an outpost bordering this green planet, which has the 8 on it. So blue would receive one dilithium resource. White has an outpost bordering that yellow planet, which also has an 8 on it. So white would receive this food resource. Now, it doesn't matter whose turn it is. Other players can receive resources no matter who rolls those dice. So, yeah, that's just how it is. Now, after the resource collection takes place, the current player can go ahead and trade with the bank or other players. If he decides to trade with the bank, he has to give up, normally, 4 cards in order to receive 1 card of the one he wants. He can cut down that ratio or cost by having outposts along these stations along the outside. You'll see like 3 to 1, 2 to 1. That simply cuts down the number of cards the player will need to trade in order to get a card that he wants. Or you can just trade with another player if you want. Now finally, a player can decide to go ahead and build starships and outposts. And it's important to note that there are some placement rules that I won't go too deep into here. But for the most part, you can't build an outpost next to a space that has an outpost. For example, blue has an outpost here. So any player would not be able to build one here, even blue. He would not be able to put an outpost there or here. However, if blue wanted to put one here, he could, because there's no outpost here and there's no outpost here. That's just, again, a very brief overview of placement. There are a few other things to consider, but that's just the highlight. After a player has done those three things, their turn basically ends. But it should be noted that a player can use these support cards on their turn. And it doesn't matter what part of the turn it's on. Some cards even specify after this certain thing happens, go ahead and do this. For example, Spock's. If any production roll is not a 7 and you receive no resources, take one resource card of your choice before any other support card is used. So, yeah, like I said, different characters have different abilities. Once you use a support card, you have two options. You can flip it to the reverse side, which has a red symbol on it, and you can use it again on a future turn. Or you can go ahead and give up the card completely, trade it in, and pick a different card from the available stock. Once, however, you use the ability for the second time, you must get rid of it and trade it in for something else. And that's basically it. All players will be doing is taking turns, rolling dice, collecting resources, and using those resources to expand their empire. Again, they can collect victory points by building outposts and star bases here. They can buy development cards, which might help them out, and allow them to earn the special cards or even development cards that have victory points on them. So there's a number of different ways that players can earn victory points. And again, the first player to earn 10 points will win the game. Now before I sign off, there's just a few things I want to touch on, mainly for the benefit of those who have never played the Settlers of Catan before. Firstly, you may be wondering why these number tokens, why some of them are red and some of them are green, why the numbers are bigger. Basically, those represent the odds that a player has in rolling those numbers. Rolling an 8 or a 6, for example, is more probable on 2 dice than rolling a 12. So that's why the number 12 is small, but the number 6 and the number 8 are big. The other thing worth mentioning is the Klingon battle cruiser. Anytime anyone rolls a 7, there is no 7 token that was left out. But whenever anyone rolls a 7, that player, instead of collecting a resource normally, can go ahead and move this to any planet they want to. And that does a number of different things. First of all, it stops that planet from producing anything. So on a future turn, if someone rolls an 11, that planet will not produce, and blue in this case is SOL. Another thing that this Klingon battlecruiser does is that the person who placed it can go ahead and steal a resource from an enemy player that happens to have an outpost there. Finally, if a player has more than 7 cards in their hand, more than 7 of these resource cards in their hand, they have to discard half. So that's pretty powerful. So this game definitely encouraged players to spend rather than hoard a whole bunch of cards. However, it's worth noting that there are cards, like the James T. Kirk card, that does prevent a player from falling victim to the Klingon battlecruiser. This is one of his special abilities. So there are different cards in the game that help negate that Klingon battlecruiser. And there you have it. That's just a very brief look at the game Star Trek Catan. I didn't cover everything found in the manual, but that is basically the general idea as far as how the game is played. You can check out my full review at www.dadsgamingaddiction.com, or you can simply click on the link in the below description that'll take you there as well. This is Vince, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.